Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us on this cold January evening. My name's Giles Whittell. I'm an editor at Tortoise, and it's a real thrill for me to be put in this particular playpen because I feel somewhat underqualified, not being one of our Whitehall specialists, but it is a consuming story that I found myself writing about at the beginning of the week for our Sensemaker email, and you will all have been reading about and listening to all week, and it is developing as we speak. So we were going to talk about the Sue Gray report, and we still are, but we were going to talk about it as an open book because it was expected to have been released by now. And we can't do that because it hasn't been. So we're going to talk about it as an object of morbid fascination instead. And I use the word morbid deliberately. It has the stink of death about it. The death of a doomed administration or of a doomed effort to hold it to account, or perhaps a mixture of both. Perhaps I'm being too gloomy. But I do worry that we are heading for a period of endless waiting for the police inquiry that is now underway, possibly others, who knows, requiring endless patience from us because the principals in this affair couldn't be trusted to say what happened, or much less to have done the right thing in the first place. Anyway, enough gloom from me. I think we'll run the next hour like a cross between an open news meeting and a regular ThinkIn. It's so current that we have to think of it partly as an open news meeting. So it'll be, to an extent, very much a free-for-all. Those of you who've been to ThinkIns before know the drill. The object, to a large extent, is to hear from you. Please get involved in the chat. My colleague James Wilson is there. By raising your hands, digital and physical, will come to you. But we are very lucky to have with us the extremely in-demand Jill Rutter, Director of the Institute for Government. I won't betray the confidences that you shared just before we started, but we will try to keep you going to the end of the hour. Our own Matthew Dancona and Lara Spirit, and I hope that we will be joined in due course by John McTernan, political strategist and former political director for Tony Blair. So as the process of the Gray reports production and publication drags out, I think we can still have a go at questions such as, can we still trust this process? Is maximum delay part of a strategy now being employed, for want of a better one, available to Downing Street to bore us as citizens into submission? If so, have the police in some way been co-opted into that strategy? As to the report itself, what should be published? What will be published? And what is it like to have the police all over Downing Street? And what is the political cost attached to that? There are some very interesting precedents. Delighted that John is here and can help us figure out what those are. But first, let me come to you, Jill. And we'll come in due course to Lara, who has her finger very much on the pulse of the lobby. But from where you're sitting, what's the hold up, and should we be worried?
I'm going to have to correct you at the start, Giles, not least because John, who's a colleague at the Institute for Government, is here, which is, unfortunately, I'm not the director of the Institute for Government. I'm a senior fellow at the Institute for Government, and I also work at UK in a Changing Europe at King's College London. So having corrected the record there, very important to get the record straight, as we know, and to get everything out in advance of discussion in order to avoid any misunderstandings. What's the delay? I think that I'm not sure that we should read vast amounts of conspiracy. It's always very easy to think there's conspiracy right, left and centre. But my experience in government is that it's usually cock up. And I think that people may have been a bit, if you like, sort of jump the gun on their briefing, that the report was done and dusted and very available. They do seem in the Cabinet Office, as far as we know, to have alerted the Metropolitan Police last week to the fact that some of their findings might justify a police investigation. That was within their terms of reference that they should do that. The Metropolitan Police then announced they were going to investigate, and we don't know exactly what the holdups are. The holdups do seem to be potentially around just working out what are the implications for what should go in this report of that police investigation. We had that sort of very odd day when we were at 1 minute told this would hold the whole thing up. Then the Metropolitan Police said didn't need to hold any of it up and stuff like that. But anyway, and then because although we focus very much on what this means for the Prime Minister, this does also affect the careers of a lot of individual civil servants and advisors. We know that the unions appear to be getting involved about the role of some junior officials and whether it's fair to name them. And there are potential HR consequences. I mean, what you might have hoped would have been that all of this would have been gained through in the first place, and people would have been able to be very clear about what the process would be. And we wouldn't have been waiting for Sue and clearing our diaries and then cancelling many of our diaries with planned events for Sue Gray Day. But I don't think if it's Monday rather than this week, that's a great evidence of massive organised cover-up. I think if it's not next week, not the week after, and somehow manages to disappear until some very convenient day, sometime when there's some absolutely massivo other news, then perhaps I look naive and somebody who is more world weary and thinks it's all conspiracy would feel vindicated. But I don't think we're necessarily having to draw that conclusion yet.
Okay, just on a point of process, thanks, Jill. Who is in control of the speed of the process and the length of the delay now? Because the report was commissioned by Boris Johnson. It is ultimately, as I understand it, up to him what to do with it. But the exact sequence and timing of what's happening at the moment seems to be up to a triangle of the author, the police, and Cabinet Office, or?
Yeah, we don't know what role exactly Simon Case is playing, because he is sort of ultimately Sue Gray and Darren Tierney, the Director General of Propriety. He is their boss on that, but he also recused himself. We don't know quite how far his recusal has taken him. So whether he's just not done the investigation, but has some sort of view on the handling of it in his role as advice to the Prime Minister, and in his role crucially in this as well as head of the civil service. So there are quite big implications that he'll need to pick up, but he may also be named. That's one of the things we don't know about. What does this report say about Simon Case? So I think until now, certainly until the sort of arrival of the police, not quite as the cavalry, maybe the reverse cavalry earlier in the week, the timings were very much in the hands of Sue and her team, though obviously the timetable was affected by the fact that there were drip feeding, courtesy of Mr. Cummings, drip feeding of more revelations. And obviously once a revelation gets to the public domain, there's a question, was that already on their list? Did they already think they knew everything they needed to know about that? Or was that new information that they then needed to look at? And that is a reasonable thing for extending your timetable. Then we had the Metropolitan Police, which does seem to have affected the timetable a bit. So the timetable to completion of the report and writing is in Sue Gray and her team's hands, subject to events. But once the report is completed, then it sort of gets passed to number 10. And then it's very much in the Prime Minister's handling this report to the Prime Minister, and it's up to him. This has always been a very unsatisfactory feature of the process and the way that Prime Minister decided to go around commissioning this. And I think it's always been rather inappropriate that the civil service is doing this investigation in the first place, because I think the civil service is in a bit of a hiding to nothing on this one. And real risks in many different ways. But because you've got that, the report goes to Downing Street, and we remember that there were big battles a couple of years back over the famous Priti Patel report, when the report was delivered to the Prime Minister by in that case, the independent advisor, Sir Alex Allen. The Prime Minister was being pressured to publish the report, ended up publishing just the sort of summary findings in his gift to decide to do that rather than chapter and verse and the whole shooting match, and sat on that report for really, really quite a long time. I think the difference in this case is that this report is so high profile. Sue Gray, the government has managed to transform Sue Gray from anonymous civil servant no one has heard of, beyond Chris Cook or whatever, to this sort of almost mythical human shield beast. So I think it's now very, very difficult for the Prime Minister to say, well, I'll sit on this for 6 months. Nobody's interested in this, are they? So I think, all the political pressure, and that's after all what it is, will be, to full publication as soon as possible. But full rather depends on what's in the report in the first place. There may be discussions going on. And to James, I mean, PM and Number 10 could, publish one sentence if they wanted to. It's their report. So it's
I wanted to ask about that. And by the way, Akoyemi Claude, I see you have your hand up, and I'd like to come to you in a second, not least because you have heeded our habitual advice to raise your hand early rather than leave it to the end. But just one more question for Jill. On what full means, this afternoon, Boris Johnson has said, yes, of course, I will do what I said I would do and have it published in full. Presumably, what does that mean? Does that mean full rather than a summary? Or does it mean full, but with all the redactions that may be inserted by other people?
Well, we don't know yet what full means. I think it means not a summary. So I think that they've got themselves into a position where what they do very often in these sorts of reports is you just have the findings, so the verdict. You don't see all the supporting evidence. So I think that wouldn't meet that criterion of the Prime Minister. I think there are these arguments. If, for example, and I don't know what's in Sue Gray's report, others of you have been, truffling around might have a better idea. But say she has an annex which has, this party was attended by Claude, Giles, Agatha, James, Mafta and Kona, and all these, do they list absolutely everybody down to, people you've never heard of and stuff like that who just walk by? I mean, do they do that, or do they delete names from that, but make sure that their managers know who they are and that action will be taken? And I think that's one of the debates that they will have had. Of course, what's full, I mean, to an extent, that will decide on what Sue Gray decides goes into Sue Gray and her team decide goes into the report. And we don't know whether that has been something where there have been, messages from Number 10 from the Cabinet Office about the, what might be useful to be in the report or not. And that's always one of the real problems with this murky process. So it's very different from when we'd have a sort of independent inquiry with some sort of judge and things like that, where it was all very clearly massively at arm's length from government. But I think, Sue's reputation is riding on this. And, she's 64, probably in her last job in government. And, she's got a reputation to protect too. She's been billed as a person of unimpeachable integrity, to be trusted to be independent, forthright, etc., etc., etc. So I think she will be pretty intolerant if there's any attempt to if you like, twist her report and make sure it's not the report that she wants to get out there.
Right. Thank you. Akoyemi Claude, you have your hand up. What did you want to say?
Yes, so what I would like to say is that I think after what Jill was saying, we have to acknowledge that she is Sue Gray, or I should say Baroness Sue Gray, is employed by Boris Johnson. And for an inquiry to be done, it would be good if it was independent. Myself and fellow other families have been campaigning for an inquiry for some time because it's been quite beneficial, you could say, for the government, even though we've had this virus. It's been beneficial in the fact that it's kind of made activism and campaigners not able to protest in person because of these restrictions and because of the pandemic. I also question on the fact that Ian Duncan Smith brought up the matter of the serious security threat which we have with China, which has not been addressed at the moment by Boris Johnson or any other parliamentary members, which is a matter that is a matter of urgency, and he did say that needed to be addressed. And I think it's quite interesting that you have that situation which hasn't been addressed, and then you have this report, and the fact of that, I think there's a lot of things that you could say. There's a lot of paper shuffling happening at the moment, and then also the factor of Sue Gray being employed by Boris Johnson, and the justice that individuals may not get in that circumstances of Sue Gray being employed by Boris Johnson. I think it's also, yeah, you were going to say, sorry.
No, I was just going to say it's a really good point, and we should definitely bear it in mind when assessing the report when it finally comes out. Jill pointed out that she has this reputation, but it will be on the line. And the fact that she is employed by and could in theory be sacked by the person who's commissioned the report is clearly really important. Thank you very much, Akoyemi. I wanted to come, I'll give you another bite at the cherry later. I can see you've got your hand up, but I just wanted to come first to John McTernan for the fairly specific reason that in a sense you have experience that is very relevant here. I should say, what a tweet thread. I advise everyone to look at the Twitter thread that John has posted on advice for civil servants in the crosshairs of police questioning in Downing Street from someone who's been there. John, now 15 years ago, you were as an advisor to Tony Blair in Downing Street during the so-called, forgive the shorthand, Cash for Honours scandal, in the same sort of position as civil servants are now. How does it affect the mood?
Well, it's funny because certainly in my situation, there was only a handful of us being investigated. So we were preparing for interviews, being interviewed, talking to solicitors, giving the police the papers they were asking for, giving them access not just to our servers in number 10, letting the forensic computer specialists reconstruct and look for any deleted emails in case there'd been a cover-up. They were also going through my personal email as well. So there were kind of, there's this going on, very intense, but you can only talk to your solicitors about it. You can't talk to your friends, you can't talk to your colleagues, particularly not the colleagues who are also being interviewed by the police. You can't talk to your family. So you've got this very intensive thing that's just really focused on you. At the same time, you're meant to be contributing to the broader agenda. This was an 18-month process for me. So most of the time after the 2007 election, until 2005 election, until Tony Blair left, I was under police investigation. And in the end, you compartmentalize, you deal with it, and you kind of unpack the whole process afterwards. And the moment I would have thought there'll be concern inside number 10, not just that, you know, most people are never interrogated by the police. Thankfully, it's happened to me on that one occasion. I don't want it to happen again. So most people will be worrying, is it them? Is it going to be them? Which of them is it? Is it the whole of number 10 being asked? Is it everybody who's at the party in the garden? Is it everybody who was at the birthday cake handover? Who is it going to be? So that kind of negative lottery, it could be you, that'll be putting stress on everybody. I am assuming that I know some people in number 10 who are rate highly. I'm assuming that the human side of this will be being coped with. People are being reassured that they're getting their they'll get the support they need, that they don't need to worry. But in the end, as I said in my tweet thread, which I expanded into a blog as well, you need, if you're going to be put in a situation where legal sanctions, we don't even know what crimes are being investigated by the police. I mean, there's been some speculation this might be about penalty notices. Well, maybe it's bigger. Who knows if it can be bigger than that? You do need legal advice before going to talk to the police, because you need to know what you're going to say, how you're going to say it. You need to be prepared. It's a completely different way of being. You're not in the public eye. You're not supporting ministers. It's just you and the police and with your solicitor. So it's a very lonely process. And I mean, I remember one bit, I was walking down a corridor number 10, and Cherie was walking towards me, and we both knew that she couldn't talk to me about what was going on. I couldn't talk to her, and all she did was give me a big hug, and then she walked on. And that kind of solidarity is what you need from your colleagues, and I'm hoping that people in number 10 are giving each other that support.
You say it's a very lonely process. Will it be a very different process for those involved to being questioned by Sue Gray? Because as you say, it may be that the biggest sanction that any of them face is a fixed penalty notice for breaking the lockdown rules. But on the other hand, the political stakes are high. So what's your gut feeling?
Look, I know Sue Gray, and I know her well. I've worked with her on a number of issues, and she is scrupulous. She is firm, and she is fair. So I don't think that people will have tried to hold things back from Sue, by and large. So, but the biggest absolute thing about cops is you shouldn't, you mustn't, and you don't hold things back from them, because that gets you into deeper and deeper trouble. Because trying to prevent justice is a bigger thing. As we all say in politics, it's often the cover up, not the action. And in this case, I mean, my goodness, we've had 2 years of cover up, really, and all being dragged out. And the slow process of dragging these issues out has been hurting the government much more, I think, than coming clean immediately on them. It will be different. Like, it's totally different, because when you go into a meeting with the interview with the police, when the door closes, there's your solicitor, and they've got these folders on the table in front of them. They are marked, they're cross-referenced, they've got a set of questions, they're driving you down. They've got a map of the world they're trying to fill in, which is a similarity with Sue Gray. There's a timeline, who did what when. There's a timeline of who knew what when, a timeline of who said what to who when, and a timeline of what the regulations were when they were in force. And with Sue Gray's inquiry and with the police, they're looking to fill in the blank spaces they don't know, and they're looking to confirm what they've built up from the papers. But I think it's been said that the Metropolitan Police are starting from scratch. They're not going to simply take Sue Gray's papers in. So if people thought that they could defend the boss by not mentioning things, or maybe there were things which were only said verbally and not in emails, and they didn't refer to those to Sue, they're going to find that they're going to have to tell everything to the police, because you go in individually and you don't know what your colleagues are saying. If you've done nothing, as we've done nothing, in the end of our inquiry 18 months later, we were all cleared. Many people in politics are accused of crimes. Very few are actually cleared of crimes. That's one of my distinctions, and my colleagues. But this is going to be a tense experience for them. I think going up into an inquiry with Sue Gray is a tense experience, but it's the fact that you're out of the culture. You're moving into a situation where Sue does many things as a senior civil servant. These police who are interviewing you, investigations have been their entire career.
Yeah,
one interview for you is a career for them.
Starting from scratch reminds me that in your case it dragged on 18 months or more. Do you expect that this could drag on much longer than people are anticipating? And if so, will it be possible to separate the two processes so that the Gray report can be published in reasonable time?
I fully anticipate this dragging on. I think, to think how long the process, the Sue Gray process has been, given that it's been started by one person, Simon Case, and taken on by Sue. And we've had this week breathless expectations of when it was going to come out, and Now we're talking about next Monday. I think in one sense, it's irrelevant when the Metropolitan Police investigation ends. It's irrelevant when Sue Gray reports, because this is a political issue. In the end, this is about, does the Prime Minister command the confidence of the House? He serves at the pleasure of the House of Commons. Does he? And he only serves at the pleasure of the House because he's got a majority within his own party. This issue would be dead and buried had Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss resigned from the cabinet on Wednesday. They'd have gone to the backbench, there would be a leadership challenge, and we'd be in that. And in a sense, that all that's happening at the moment is a leadership challenge is being kicked down the road. And from the Prime Minister's point of view, this is perfect, because what's happening is we're moving further and further away from the precise details of what happened, who knew what when, what was done,
right,
what was said about it. We're moving away from that, and that's to his benefit, because all crises have a moment when they get either too complicated for the public to remember what actually the focus of them is, and they kind of blow away, or they come down to a simple question, which is yes or no. And that is, for me, the question is, does he have the confidence of his party, his colleagues in the Tory party, or not? And at the moment, it looks as though he didn't have it, or he nearly lost it, and now he's got it. And it's the price will get paid if that happens. If there's delay and everything, the price will be a political one.
Well, you've almost answered the question that I wanted to ask next, and which I want to put to Matt d'Ancona in a second, but let me just put it explicitly. Are you saying that the fact that the police have become involved actually diminishes rather than increases the political risk to Johnson?
I think look, if the police were to issue a fixed penalty notice to the Prime Minister, that would feel as it was quite hard to ride through. But we have a Prime Minister who's ridden through things which have brought down anybody else. In one sense, he feels to me like the Tory match to Jeremy Corbyn. Nobody believed that you could have a vote of no confidence passed in you by the Parliamentary Labour Party and still stay on as leader. Corbyn didn't care. If you can't shame a shameless man, and that's the issue with the Prime Minister. How can you shame a shameless man? And it feels to me that the issue is that the more strands there are to the story, the better for him almost. So again, today's story about the evacuation of animals, he authorized this, and now because it's uncomfortable, he says he didn't. And people are going, and this is the essence of the Prime Minister. Is he wants lots of plates to be spinning because he can sort of run around from one to the other, and you can't get the focus on what is the accusation against him. Last night, Annalise Dodds was on Newsnight, and he couldn't quite work out what she thought the accusation against the Prime Minister was. You have to keep coming back to say, what is it? What is it we're saying about this man that is so devastating that it compounds what he's done, has the big impact? And that goes back again to politics and comms. It's not really about process. The more we're in process, the happier he is, because the Prime Minister breaks, he breaks normal convention. And if it all comes down to convention, he'll keep moving.
Thank you so much. Yes, The Shameless Man has already been identified in the chat by Mark S. as an excellent podcast title. Matt, that could be the title of your next essay on this. Matt, happy birthday. You're going to have an entirely legitimate post-lockdown party after this, and I hope it's a great one. In the meantime, do you agree with John that the more plates spinning, the better for Johnson, or is there a critical mass of spinning plates that eventually is too much for him to support?
I do agree with John that the more complex the story becomes, the better for Johnson. I think the essence of this is, and the danger, the peril to Johnson is its simplicity. And the question that I think is unanswered is, can that simplicity endure? The simplicity of the question hitherto has been a very clear one, which is these people made rules, whether or not you thought they were write these rules. They were the rules. Everyone else, more or less, followed them. But these people, in a systemic way, not just an accidental, occasional way, but in a systemic way, the rule makers broke them. That is a lethal combination, an unprecedented form of hypocrisy. I think that some Tories, Crispin Blunt MP has offered a defence, which is that these rules were broken in most homes. I don't think that's true. I think that one of the defining characteristics of the lockdown was how, to a startling extent, and an extent that I remember surprised cabinet ministers at the time, people did stick to the rules, often at huge inconvenience, great personal cost, and in some cases, emotional trauma. I don't think that there was a kind of nudge culture. I mean, some people I'm sure did break the rules, but I don't think that it was a common practice, particularly in that first lockdown, particularly in we're talking, the March, April, May 2020. If the focus can be kept on that, and if what Sue Gray discovers and the Met then pursues leads to clear findings on that, then I think he's still in huge trouble. And I think what's important to remember is we already do know quite a lot about the Sue Gray report because of what Cressida Dick said. I mean, she said that it was already clear. She gave 3 tests, said that that there was evidence that there was law breaking that people ought to have known about, that not to pursue it would undermine the legitimacy of the law, and that there were instances where there was an absence of any reasonable defense. That means that we can already say that there are very significant breaches in the Gray report, in whatever form it finally comes out. I think the Gray report will return a degree of focus to this story, and that I think will be the moment of maximum danger. I don't think it'll be the Met report. I think that where I agree with John is that I think this gets decided quickly or not at all. So I think that when Sue Gray's report is published, that is when Tory MPs will respond, and I think the public will respond too. It was very interesting. There was some to and fro on Twitter today between people conducting focus groups and polls and so on. And it's clear that the overwhelming opposition to Johnson on this remains in place. That the Tory MPs may be wavering and faltering and wondering about the electoral calculus, but the public are at the moment in a fixed place. And it's a very dangerous one for Johnson.
Right. That being so, Chris Cregan is asking in the chat about historical context. And I wonder, what are the relevant points from history to put this in the right sort of context? It's not just about cake. It's about the rule of law, hypocrisy, double standards. One thing I like to add is idiocy. But just on a sort of technical level, we're told that no prime minister has been interviewed by the police under caution. Is it at all or in a century? And
well, I believe, but you see, to anticipate your question, yeah. I went back to Blair's memoirs on this, and he made it very clear at the time that if he was interviewed under caution, he would resign, which I think would have been an honourable thing to do. Johnson's allies have already said he won't. So if this is the problem with precedent, is that this is a profoundly unconservative regime. Mm. You heard Jacob Rees-Mogg is going around, in particular, knocking down precedents everywhere. Saying that if he, for example, if he claimed on Newsnight this week that if there was a change of prime minister, there would have to be a general election. Constitutional nonsense, but very much in character from a leader of the House that lied to the Queen about the reason for the prorogation of Parliament in 2019. Again, claiming that if the prime minister was interviewed under caution, this would not be a resigning matter, breaking with precedent. I mean, it's always interesting to look at precedent, but the defining characteristic of this regime, for all the fact that there are the plummy accents, the Eton and Oxford backgrounds, is that they are hyper-modern politicians. They are populists who make the rules up as they go. And they were completely content, never forget, to systematically break the rules on COVID when people were dying in their thousands, which tells you a great deal about how they're going to respond to this, which is, we are special and different. We will do anything to escape accountability for this. I mean, it's very dangerous to assume, in a sense, having written political columns for a while, my instinct is always to go back to precedents, think, well, what would Thatcher have done? Where would Blair be on this? What about Anthony Eden? I have to say that one of the problems about Boris Johnson is that, to a great extent, you're talking about year zero. It's almost impossible to deduce from precedent what he will do.
Okay, well, on that point, Matt, and I want to get Gill's view on this as well. The rule that is often cited as unbreakable is that if you mislead Parliament, if you are found to have misled Parliament, you have to resign. Johnson has said that if he is, he will. Do you think if it came to it, and if it was pretty unambiguous from the Gray report that he had, that he would? You first, Matt, and then Gill, on whether he would actually resign if found to have misled Parliament.
Well, it depends what he himself would accept was a lie, because the wording of the things that he said, there are a series of remarks he made in December about the parties, and the wording was very careful, which it was about, I was assured that. And he may be able to claim that he was assured. Then, of course, there may be evidence in the Gray report, I don't know, that it was, it's the balance of probability, or indeed outright evidence shows that he was informed that these were parties. But one needs to be very careful. One needs to go back to the precise wording of the statements. I think there's one on December the 8th and one on December the 2nd, if memory serves, where he responds to questions about this. It would have to be absolutely clear that there was the report totally contradicted what he had said. He will do anything. He will wriggle. He is not a normal politician in the British tradition.
Thank you. John has raised his hand on this. I saw you nodding, so maybe we'll go to John first, and then Gill, and then I'd like to come to Claire Montague, because you've raised an alarm. But John.
So there's a very useful book for modern politicians for everybody to read, which is Harry Frankfurt's book on bullshit. And in it, he distinguishes between lies and bullshit. And the key thing is that bullshitters aren't lying. Liars know there's a truth and there's a lie. Bullshitters constantly create the reality around them by the way they operate. And we've got a prime minister who lives in a perpetual present. Everything he does is now. The past is irrelevant. It's like somebody from a soap opera has come into our politics. In the way at the end of a series of Dallas, Bobby's alive. Like you get these soap opera changes, and he doesn't believe that the character he was yesterday is the character he is today, and it has no. And so far, it has never hurt him. It didn't hurt him over Jennifer Arcuri. He has a series of issues which have brought down a different politician, not a lesser one, but a different one. And he will exactly. He might not even do what Matt's saying. He might not even be literalist. He might simply just. Just keep talking the way he's doing over pen farthing. He's refusing to accept the reality. No civil servant in a private office will make up a direction from the Prime Minister. If he believed that was made up, there'd be a number 10 inquiry into why a civil servant made up a direction, a decision by the Prime Minister. So in that sense, what we're going to get is more of this politician. And the difficulty for the opposition is to focus down, as Matt said, and the difficulty for his own party is to put their arms around him. And the difficulty for them is when they go back to their constituencies, the public and the voters don't like what's going on, but the constituency association members do. And which is why it requires a leader to take this out. Heseltine took out Thatcher. even though he didn't get the crown in the end, Johnson took out Theresa May. Who is the one who's going to take this man out? It's a political operation lacking a leader. There's a cause, but there's no candidate. Thanks,
John. Jill, briefly, and I see we've got a couple of hands up. Does he keep to his word about going if he's found to have lied?
Well, he said that he thinks the ministerial code applies to him when Keir Starmer asked him on that. But the Prime Minister is the arbiter of what's a breach of the ministerial code. So, so he may find he's not in breach of the ministerial code and not feel obliged to resign. I think this point about assurance is really, really interesting. And it's very interesting whether Sue Gray goes into that, because if it's very clear that the Prime Minister was at something that the Prime Minister had to have realised was a party, then why on earth was he waiting for assurances anyway? Can he point to the fact that he had any reason to believe he wasn't at a party? I think that's quite interesting question. He may say it was in my house, so it doesn't apply to me. So they were at a party, but I wasn't. I was just in my garden. God knows what he would do. But I think I agree with Charlotte, who said I didn't think he was a resigning type. I don't think Boris Johnson is a natural resigner. And if you had Will Moy from Full Fact here, or very many of them, Peter Stefanovich, Peter Obot, one of these people, they would say that Boris Johnson has repeatedly made statements to Parliament that are verifiably not right, and that any normal politician would be embarrassed by and correct the record and things like that. And he doesn't do that. I mean, he doesn't regard that part of the rules applying to him. And I'm sure he will find a survival strategy if he can. But as John said, it's ultimately, it all depends on whether he can retain the confidence of his Conservative MPs and whether they think that he has turned from being a mega electoral asset that they turned to in summer 2019 when they're in the electoral doldrums into a toxic electoral liability. And that is the calculation for most of them.
You rest your head wearily in your hand and say you're sure.
That's because I was up at 6 a.m. So
but there's also grounds for a sort of existential weariness. It sort of goes with your forecast that he will find a way to survive. And it would be great in the time available if we can get into what happens if he does. What policies does he mobilize to shore up his base again before the election? But first, there are a couple of hands up. Thank you for being patient. Una, and then we'll come to Quentin. Una Yates.
Hi, yeah, my question was really around what we've been discussing, which is like, what do we do about these leaders that just are completely shameless? I know a lot of people in the chat were saying it's, very similar to Trump. Everyone thought that Access Hollywood tapes would be the end of his campaign. And it just wasn't, because he could just ride it out. And it seems that kind of in both the US and the UK, the kind of constitutional systems we have to hold people to account, these types of people to account, are incredibly weak. And even speaking to, fairly liberal people, the amount that they're willing to excuse Johnson at this point, I think the pandemic did him lots of favors in terms of covering all manners of sins. And now an issue like COVID and parties, which you think would be so uniting across all divides, he seems to be sort of slipping away. And I don't know if I'm being too pessimistic because the report hasn't come out yet, and maybe that will be the decisive moment. But yeah, my question is really like, what is the future when we get more of these leaders who just don't care about, shame or decency or tradition? So yeah, thanks.
No, it's a great question. I never said, by the way, that we have an informal rule against questions, which is supposed to liberate you just to say what's on your mind. But it's a really interesting point, and we'll put it to Jill and Matt and John if we have time. And by the way, that American reference, the Access Hollywood tape, and then when he was in office, of course, I see parallels between the Mueller report and the Trump administration and the Gray report. Now there was tremendous media expectation invested in the Mueller report. It was damning. It just wasn't read as damning by the administration. Quentin. MacDonald. Can you unmute yourself, Quentin? We can't hear you just yet.
Okay. Is that
Good.
it?
Yep.
I'm a former City of York councillor for 12 years, both in opposition and in control. I cannot imagine saying anything to council in which I was doing anything other than being selective with the truth. I can imagine not telling the whole story. I cannot imagine being a liar. And that's the big problem that this man presents me with. I'm old enough to have lived under, I think, 14 prime ministers, going back to Chamberlain. And I expect my leader, irrespective of party, to demonstrate visible leadership. He's got to look, or she has got to look like a leader, sound like a leader, act like a leader, deliver like a leader, be excellent, honourable, and not a liar. And this man doesn't do that, doesn't believe in that, cannot understand that, it seems. I mean, I've read Peter Oborn's book, The Assault on Truth, and I recommend it to people everywhere because this man is just something else. The rules do not apply to him. Nowhere could I see that more obviously than when he walked out of St. Thomas's Hospital after he'd been at death's door, and I've no reason to doubt that he was in a difficult way. First question, how the hell did he get COVID? He's the Prime Minister. Why wasn't he taking every conceivable protection against it? Second rule, why wasn't he wearing a mask when he walked down the road? I mean, it's got to be visible leadership. We are being led by a total clown. And
Thank you, Quentin. Well,
point about that. Sorry, yes, shut up.
No. We are running out of time, but in partial answer to your question, how did he get it? We've established at Tortoise that he was playing fast and loose with his own rules and commuting between London and Chequers. So there was plenty of interaction with people at Chequers, even if there wasn't at Downing Street, and even if in practice he is likely to have given COVID to those there rather than the other way around. I wanted in the 10 minutes, in part of the 10 minutes remaining, to get into the question, since people are wearily conceding that he may well pull through the immediate crisis, what happens then as his administration sort of claws its way back to normal life and government and policies? What, Matt, I don't know if you're still with us. I'd be really interested to know, do you think he mobilizes in policy terms? One thinks of the BBC, one thinks of the national insurance contribution debate, to mollify, pacify the restive base and rebuild his 75-seat majority, not as a threat to him, but as a support.
No, I think he's done. I mean, interesting, the Times reporting this evening that he's already offering as an olive branch to the backbenchers, querulous backbenchers, that he'll ditch the national insurance hikes. I wonder if that's true, but it's interesting that's being signalled. And you're right, Giles, that as we saw the weekend before last, he's more than willing to throw the world's greatest public service broadcaster under the bus if it'll buy him a bit more time. But his time as a significant reformer, in as much as he had one, is over. What you'll see if he does survive is a kind of performative politics based around permanent campaigning, slogans, the sloshing of a bit of cash here and there, arguments between himself and his more Thatcherite backbenchers leading nowhere, ever sharper distinction between his own view of infrastructure projects, spending and borrowing, and Rishi Sunak's completely different approach. It will be a very stale, lamed up premiership. I mean, there is a precedent here, and it's not one Johnson would enjoy, but it's 1995, which is Major did have a leadership contest to flush out his opponents. Portillo didn't stand. John Major did. He won. And he stayed in office for 2 more years and then lost catastrophically to Tony Blair. So I think that there's a sort of can-kicking mentality among some Tory backbenchers that if he can get through to the other side, that as it were, normal service will be restored. Normal service will never be restored for Boris Johnson now. It's conceivable he could survive this crisis. He may well, but he is broken in half. And I think that the Conservative Party should be very, very wary of assuming that in today's volatile, digitally driven politics, that they can keep a prime minister in this condition on the life support system until 2024. That is a very big ask. And we know there are going to be more stories like this, irrespective of Sue Gray's report, irrespective of what the Met found. Dominic Cummings has already told us that there are. So can I plot a path to his survival? Yes. Can I plot a path to his recovery as a consequential prime minister? Absolutely not.
But a lot of use and abuse of policies such as those you mentioned for purely political aims.
Yes, I mean, could he do a lot of damage to this country if he survived? Absolutely. Oh, I mean, 100%.
Okay, well, let me hold that thought. Speaking of damage to the country, before we come back to John, I did want to come to Claire, if she's still with us, Claire Montague, because you apologise for being an old git about this. Claire, hello. Tell us what's on your mind.
So I'm a kind of like old constitutional git, and hello, John, because we worked together back in those days. But it's really about kind of constitution and norms in public life and standards in public life. And actually governments of all stripes, including the Cameron government, as well as Blair and Brown and predecessors, behaved in a certain way and adhered to certain standards in public life. And we rely on people adhering to those norms because we don't have a written constitution. Mind you, even in the US, it still gets violated by people like Trump. And I suppose my worry is when you get pure shamelessness, like Johnson, like Rees-Mogg, like others, who just decide that convention is not for them because all they care about is the next announcement or the next immediate election. Why would anyone in the future, as soon as norms get shattered, why does anyone in the future adhere to those norms? And what does that vacuum create in terms of future politicians? So I can imagine a world in which when Johnson eventually goes, you get someone who is, one would hope, more managerial, more sober, probably less flashy in the way that you get that sort of mix between Blair and Brown and Cameron and May or whatever. But all the stuff that you create, which is your set of expectations about integrity and honour and convention, which is how we do public life, irrespective of party, falls away once someone has just decided it's not for them. And I don't know what then happens in the future and how we safeguard against those things that we care about.
Is there political currency, capital to be earned in rebuilding them, in making that part of your platform?
My worry is potentially, but I think that is also dependent on the venality or rather caringness or otherwise of MPs who are in the party at the time. Because what you're seeing at the moment, I think, in the Conservative Party is a swing between people who recognise that integrity and doing what he's done and lying about it is just not on something as serious as this, versus those that are feeling, yeah, but he still is a great campaigner and he delivers as an 80-seat majority and we've got a not particularly inspiring leader of the opposition. And actually no one goes to town on the great woohoo, the Nolan principles of public life. I mean, that's not exactly what wins you votes when you're looking at energy bills and inflation and various other things. So while I can imagine a world in which certainly a punt towards integrity is something that you would kind of position yourself on, it's part of the things, it's a bit like damaging your position internationally. No one cares that you've started slagging off the French publicly, but it means that you can't work with them privately, or that you've started to undermine your own treaty that you negotiated a year ago, because no one in Britain really, really cares about that to the extent that they're going to vote. But actually it starts unraveling a whole load of ways in which you conduct yourself that I think have really serious long-term implications.
And the parallels with the US are quite terrifying. I have been remiss in not calling on Lara, and I want to come to Lara if you're still with us. As our resident pulse taker, in the virtual Portcullis house. Let's look. You've got a crystal ball. Just on the timing of the next few days, what do you think is going to happen?
I mean, my guess is as good as anybody else's, and I don't think anybody serious is making any definitive judgment about when the report is going to be published, although I think the kind of most likely scenario looks like it might be Monday for the reasons that we've already spoken about. I think the interesting thing that we've been touching on tonight that I've been thinking quite a lot about is even after this report is published, and even if Johnson is able to survive it, and I think the last 48 hours for Truss and Sunak, as I think we've discussed in the chat, have been quite difficult. I struggle to see how Boris Johnson makes it through the next 4 weeks, kind of in a strong position. I think if you look at, still no serious answer to the cost of living crisis. I put it in the chat, but this idea that and this is kind of part of the most interesting thing for me, is that everybody is focusing on the energy among the Conservative backbenchers that Matt has spoken about for scrapping this NI hike. But actually, you look at it and, over half of it's going to be paid by the top 20% of earners anyway. It's not a serious solution to the cost of living crisis, right? Not that it necessarily ever was, but because there is so much political capital tied up with this idea around what Boris Johnson does and doesn't throw to his backbenchers, we're kind of rejigging our arguments around the kind of most salient political arguments of the day along the lines of his survival. So I don't think we'll be out of that, the kind of narrative, for a little while, but also lest we forget levelling up, which could be published next week, might have to be pushed further. Like, this is the government's flagship policy, and so much energy has had to go into Johnson's survival in the last few weeks. Hold up in Chequers last weekend, having to phone MPs, having meetings all throughout the day with backbench MPs, some of which he's probably meeting for the second, third, fourth time or whatever, trying to secure his survival should he go to a confidence vote. But if levelling up is a big failure, and there are still sort of wranglings reported between the Treasury and Number 10 and Gove's levelling up department, if they can't figure that stuff out and levelling up falls on deaf ears and turns out to be a massive failure, that's also going to be really politically damaging for Boris Johnson's government, especially in the context of the energy crisis. So I think even should he survive this, and I know somebody put John's thread in the chat, but there was another interesting thread of John's that I just found about what Boris Johnson should do, which was kind of, I would love to discuss tonight, maybe we can discuss it another time, this idea if he should call a confidence vote and force Sunak into answering him on stuff like NI, etc. This kind of bullish approach. I think that's a really interesting prospect, but I do definitely think that, over focus, we've put so much on this Sue Gray report, but we shouldn't necessarily over focus on it when there's going to be so much else that's coming up in the next couple of weeks as well.
Thanks very much, Lara. You set out, you addressed substantive issues, which in my shallowness I didn't, but you also set out a sort of 4-week horizon. Very briefly, Jill and John, in the time left, does he survive 4 weeks? Jill first.
Sorry, you didn't unmute me.
You're unmuted now.
Does he survive 4 weeks? Yeah, probably. Who knows? Do the 54 letters go in? Does he survive maybe? Does he survive a confidence vote? Probably on balance. He would do, because of the lack of a very obvious successor. But we don't know. We don't know how damaging the report will be. We don't know how the dynamic things. But on everybody who's saying, how do you get away with it? The ultimate thing is, if voters show they care about this, then that will reflect back into the political system. That's what you need to make sure is, if there's an electoral price to pay, then these standards will be upheld. If there's not, then you give license to those who are prepared to ignore them.
Thank you very much, Jill. John, I'm sorry that I hadn't spotted that other tweet thread, but does he survive 4 weeks?
Look, just to answer Claire's point first, we have a crisis of the British state. That's what Brexit was. It's a symptom of that. That is what the SNP strength in Scotland is. That is what Corbyn was. That is what Johnson is. There's a crisis at the imperial centre. So we need to be serious about that. This is not going to, this has to be dealt with in a substantial way by the next government of another party. Does he survive? Yes. How could he survive? What I would do is, straight after the the Sue Gray report, I would table a confidence vote in the House. I'd say I've reported the House. I said I'm now calling a confidence vote in the House. It would force Tory MPs to either vote for him or vote for Christian Wakeford and Keir Starmer. I just drive through in that way. My thread was about all the different policy things you could do, and in my mind, don't throw policy wastefully at your backbenchers. Have a confidence vote, confront internally in your cabinet, and keep driving. You've stolen Labour's voters. Why not give Labour voters what Labour voters want? They do not want tax cuts in a small state. You've got to give them. You got to, go to your core. With Johnson, he liked to spend public cash like a drunken sailor on shore leave. That's what I would do.
John, thank you very much. Thanks to everyone who's joined us. I'm sorry that we're out of time and I haven't been able to come back to you, Akweyemi, but I do note your point, which perhaps is a good starting point for all of this, that Sue Gray serves at the behest of the Prime Minister. We should remember that. We started with Jill's reminder that it's cock-up rather than conspiracy that usually accounts for things like the delay that determined our subject matter this evening. We ended with a plea from Claire for integrity, honour, convention, and the Nolan principles. And there's quite a lot of love in the chat for the Nolan principles, by the way. But in between, some really fascinating thoughts to try and hold and as the next few weeks unfold from Matt about these buffoons as in fact ruthless, hypermodern politicians operating in year zero, in which the past is irrelevant. We nonetheless discussed historical precedents. I mean, I think, and I end up concluding that the situation is unprecedented. In a sense, it's about cake, but it's about so much more than that. And taking the pulse of this digital room, the consensus seems to be that he will pull through the immediate crisis, which for him might seem a victory of sorts, but the time scale that he's operating on is a bit like that of my golden retriever, today and perhaps a few days ahead, if that, but that he's toast long term, certainly as Matt noted, as a politician of substance. Thank you all very much. This will go on. I'm sure we'll be talking about this, whether or not the report is published this time next week. So Jill, John, and Matt and Lara from our own team, Claire and Akweyemi and everybody else, thanks so much for joining us. Have a very good evening.